May 1940. Dunkirk. The beaches are packed, the air is dirty with smoke, and the ocean looks like the only exit left. From high ground, German officers watch through binoculars as Britain's army scrambles out, men loaded onto anything that floats, and, behind them on the sand, a graveyard of gear, trucks, guns, ammo, broken vehicles, abandoned stores. It looks like a knockout, not a retreat, a defeat you don't come back from. In German headquarters, the mood turns casual fast. France is collapsing. The Low Countries got rolled up in days. Poland fell in weeks. And now Britain has been shoved back onto its island with most of its heavy equipment left behind. The prediction in Berlin feels obvious. Britain, stripped of an expeditionary army, will ask for terms. Soon, a couple weeks, maybe 3. Because that's what European governments do when the numbers say the game is over. And on paper, the numbers were brutal. Britain's losses in the campaign in France were enormous. Tens of thousands killed, wounded, or captured. The British Expeditionary Force abandoned mountains of equipment on the continent, thousands of artillery pieces, tens of thousands of vehicles, huge stockpiles of supplies. Back home, the British Army had shockingly few modern guns ready across the country. In some places, troops drilled with makeshift training gear because real anti-tank weapons were too scarce to hand out widely. In the air, the problem looked just as bad. Fighter Command had lost hundreds of aircraft in the fighting over France and during the retreat. Worse than planes, it lost trained, combat-ready pilots, the thing you can't mass-produce overnight. Germany's Air Force believed Britain's experienced pilot pool had been chewed up and wouldn't bounce back fast. And at sea, Britain faced a nasty reality too. The Royal Navy still mattered, but it was now carrying the whole burden without help from a French fleet that had been part of the old balance. Meanwhile, Germany looked unstoppable. Thousands of aircraft, thousands of tanks. An army that had just marched through half of Europe like the rules didn't apply to it. German divisions were confident, seasoned, and powered by a style of warfare that kept smashing defenses before anyone could reorganize. So German planners ran the math and arrived at a conclusion that felt airtight. Britain's ability to keep making war was close to tapped out. Not permanently, maybe, but for long enough that Germany could force a settlement and lock in its victory. That conclusion relied on one assumption, that Britain would behave reasonably. That once the shock wore off, cooler heads would look at the situation and choose negotiation over national ruin. And that assumption was about to blow up in their faces, because instead of a peace message, Germany got a voice. On June 4, 1940, Winston Churchill gave a speech that German listening posts picked up and translated fast. It wasn't a detailed plan. It was a statement of intent. Britain would keep fighting. On the beaches, on landing grounds, in streets, wherever it had to. German intelligence officers shrugged at first. Politicians say dramatic things. A government can talk tough while it quietly prepares to accept reality. But then the weeks passed, and Britain didn't move toward peace. It moved toward war. And German pilots started noticing something that didn't fit the story they'd been told. They were told Britain was almost out of fighters, that Fighter Command was barely holding together, that the island was one more push away from breaking. But in the skies over the Channel and southern England, German aircrews kept running into British fighters, again and again, like the RAF had more planes than it was supposed to, and more pilots than it should have. This wasn't supposed to happen. The air battle that becomes the Battle of Britain officially kicks off in July 1940, though the fighting doesn't start from zero. After Dunkirk, the air war is already simmering. Hit-and-run attacks, probes, small clashes. But now, Germany turns it into a plan. The plan has a name everyone remembers. Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of Britain. And the step before the invasion is clear. Destroy the RAF in the south. Take control of the sky over the Channel and the landing areas. Then you can move ships, barges, troops, whatever you need, without getting shredded from the air. Hermann Goering promises Hitler the Luftwaffe can sweep British fighters aside in a matter of weeks. Germany had just dominated the skies over France. It expects the same result here. So the Luftwaffe starts throwing organized force at Britain. Bomber formations aimed at airfields, aircraft factories, and radar-related targets, with fighter escorts to keep British interceptors off them. Across the Atlantic, the United States watches. America is still neutral, and the loudest voices in U.S. Politics are arguing not to get dragged into another European war, Even America's ambassador in London, Joseph Kennedy, sends reports back to Washington that read like a slow-motion eulogy. The message is basically, Britain can't hold, and any support is going into a sinkhole. Franklin Roosevelt is sympathetic, but constrained by Congress, by public opinion, by neutrality laws and political reality. So America watches, debates, delays, and stays out. Germany expects Britain to crack. Instead, it collides with a system because Britain's air defense isn't just courage. It's organization built around early warning and control in a way Germany doesn't fully respect at first. Britain's radar network provides something that changes everything. Time, not hours, minutes, but minutes are enough. Radar stations on the coast can spot incoming formations while they're still over the water, and controllers can push fighters into the right place at the right altitude. The RAF isn't just guessing where the enemy might be. It's being directed, vectored, like a quarterback calling plays before the snap. Germany, by comparison, leans more on observer reports and pilot sightings, methods that can work but don't produce the same consistent warning and coordination. So German bombers cross the channel expecting surprise and find British fighters already climbing into position, waiting in the lanes Germany's formations naturally fly through. From a German crew's perspective, it can feel unreal. They vary routes, change altitude, shift timing, and still the RAF shows up like it has eyes in the fog. Radar is the advantage that turns defense into a science. But radar doesn't pull the trigger. The pilots do. And Britain's fighter pilots are working under pressure that is hard to even picture now. Multiple scrambles a day, fast turnarounds, minimal rest. They go up on fumes and adrenaline, fight, land, refuel, rearm, and go again. And the raw numbers often look ugly in the moment. Germany can put up big formations. Bombers wrapped in escorts, dozens upon dozens of aircraft moving as one. Britain frequently meets them with smaller groups that have to hit hard, hit fast, and survive. This is where the math starts changing, because Britain's losses and Germany's losses aren't equal in meaning. A fighter plane can be replaced. A pilot takes time. A bomber can be replaced. A trained bomber crew, especially experienced ones, are harder. And Germany begins bleeding crews in daylight attacks. As the battle escalates, Germany shifts targets. It starts leaning into raids that hit London and other cities more directly, believing that civilian pressure will break British morale or force the government to seek peace. The first major daylight raids on London in early September 1940 are massive by the standards of the time. Big bomber formations with heavy fighter escort. For German crews, it feels like weight of numbers should settle the issue. You can't stop everything, but the RAF throws up what it can. Not perfectly, not without losses, but enough to make the Luftwaffe pay. The sky over southern England becomes a rolling brawl. High-altitude engagements fragment into chases, dives, split-second bursts, desperate turns. Some fights end when ammunition runs out. Some end when a damaged aircraft limps away. Some end in the water, and through September into October, the pattern grinds on. Germany hits. Britain rises. Germany hits again. Britain rises again. Britain loses aircraft. Britain loses pilots. London takes damage. People die. Fires rage. But the RAF doesn't collapse the way Germany needs it to collapse. And here's the part Germany can't solve. When British pilots bail out over Britain, many live to fly again. When German crews go down over England, they're captured or dead. The loss isn't just metal, it's manpower that doesn't come back. By late October, Germany is forced to admit something it doesn't want to say out loud. Daylight strategic bombing is too costly. Air superiority isn't happening. And without air superiority, an invasion across the channel is a gamble that can turn into a massacre. So Germany shifts toward night raids, where interception is harder, and the invasion plan fades from next step to someday, and then quietly into not happening. Operation Sea Lion is postponed, and the postponement becomes permanent. Britain, alone, battered, and supposedly finished, has just blocked the easiest path to Germany's final victory in the West. And across the Atlantic, America is still watching, still debating, still not in the fight. But Britain isn't just surviving. It's about to hit back in a way that shocks the world, using planes Germany and Italy don't even take seriously. If you want the rest of this story, Stick around and make sure you're following, because what Britain does next changes naval warfare and helps set the stage for the war America eventually enters. Britain has just denied Germany the one clean ending it wanted, a quick knockout by invasion. So Germany adjusts. The Luftwaffe leans harder into night attacks because it can't safely win in daylight the way it planned. And Britain's cities begin living under a new routine: sirens, blackout curtains, shattered glass, and fire crews running on no sleep. But here's what most people miss when they summarize this period as Britain endured bombing. Britain didn't just endure. While America stayed neutral and argued about risk, Britain started taking bold swings that changed the whole map, at sea, in the desert, and across the Mediterranean. And one of the most important blows starts in a place most Americans don't think about at all: southern Italy, Taranto Harbor, November 11, 1940. Italy's navy, the Regia Marina, has a major part of its battle fleet sitting at anchor. These aren't little ships. They include modern battleships that represent Mussolini's best shot at dominating the Mediterranean. If Italy can keep that fleet strong, the Mediterranean can become an Axis-controlled highway. If Italy loses it, everything gets harder: supply lines, North Africa, even the pressure on Britain's lifelines. Taranto is defended like it's untouchable: anti-aircraft guns, barrage balloons, nets meant to protect against torpedoes, and most of all, confidence, because the old assumption says capital ships sitting in a defended harbor are safe from carrier aircraft. Especially at night, especially in shallow water, Britain decides to test that assumption with aircraft that look like they belong in a museum. Fairy swordfish biplanes, slow, fabric and metal, outdated on paper. The kind of plane that gets mocked by people who only respect speed and modern design. They launch from the carrier HMS Illustrious and head into the dark. The British attack comes in two waves about an hour apart. The first wave drops flares, turning the harbor into a harsh, artificial daylight and exposing ships that were supposed to be protected by darkness. Italian gunners respond instantly. Tracer fire cuts through the sky. Searchlights sweep. The harbor becomes a cage of light and flak, and the swordfish go low, dangerously low, skimming above the water to deliver torpedoes. Then the second wave comes in after the defenders are fully awake, fully angry, and now expecting more attacks. That's the moment most air raids fail. The surprise is gone. The guns are ready. Everyone is looking. The British press in any way. By morning, the results are impossible to ignore. 3 Italian battleships are put out of action, 1 sunk in shallow water, and others damaged badly enough that they're removed from service for months. Britain loses only 2 aircraft. In a single night, the balance of power in the Mediterranean shifts. Italy's big fleet strategy takes a major hit. British convoys to Malta become more viable. The Mediterranean turns into a contested sea instead of an Italian-controlled lake, and the North African fight, which depends on supply moving across the water, becomes more survivable for Britain. And around the world, naval planners pay attention, because Taranto proves something that will echo later. Carrier aircraft can cripple a battle fleet in harbor, even with heavy defenses, even in conditions people said were too difficult, including shallow water, if you adapt the weapons and fly with discipline. That lesson does not stay in the Mediterranean. While this is happening, America is still not in the war, still debating, still cautious. Britain keeps fighting alone. And then, in North Africa, Britain lands another shock. December 1940. Libya and Egypt. Italy has built up a large force in Libya, roughly 150,000 troops, with tanks, artillery, and supply lines that run back through Tripoli. Facing them near the Egyptian border is a much smaller British and Commonwealth force, about 30,000 men under General Richard O'Connor. The Western Desert Force. On paper, Italy has the advantage. Numbers, positions, confidence. Mussolini has promised Hitler big results: an offensive through Egypt, pressure toward the Suez Canal, a path to a wider empire. Italy expects Britain to stay defensive, stay careful, stay pinned. Instead, Britain attacks. Operation Compass begins on December 9, 1940. It starts as a limited raid, hit forward camps, disrupt supplies, and pull back before Italy can respond in force. But the raid doesn't stay limited, because the Italian defense has gaps and brittleness that Britain recognizes fast. and exploits hard. British armor and mobile units move in ways Italian planners don't expect. They slip through spaces that were considered unusable, maneuvering across desert routes that Italian intelligence had judged too rough or too empty to matter. The desert becomes a weapon, not an obstacle, because the British navigate, coordinate, and strike where the defenses aren't facing. Italian positions built to stop a frontal approach find British forces appearing on their flanks or in their rear. Strong points get isolated, supply lines get cut. Units that try to hold are surrounded. Units that try to retreat are chased down and boxed in again. One position falls, then another. Sidi Barrani is taken quickly, then Bardia falls and tens of thousands surrender, then Tobruk. And the British advance keeps rolling west faster than Italian command can organize a coherent escape. The numbers by early 1941 are staggering. In about 2 months, Operation Compass drives roughly 500 miles into Libya, smashes around 10 Italian divisions, captures about 130,000 prisoners, and takes huge amounts of equipment, hundreds of tanks, and well over 1,000 artillery pieces. British losses are comparatively low for an offensive of this scale. Hundreds killed and a few thousand wounded, with dozens of tanks destroyed. This is not the behavior of a country fundamentally exhausted. This is not a nation begging for terms. This is a nation hitting back so hard it breaks an Axis ally in the field, and that forces a decision in Berlin. Germany didn't plan to spend its best resources in North Africa. Germany's big strategic focus is elsewhere. But Italy is collapsing in a theater Germany can't afford to lose, not because Libya itself is sacred, but because the consequences ripple outward. The Mediterranean, the Suez route, the whole pressure line on Britain. So in February 1941, Hitler sends German forces to North Africa, the Afrika Korps, under Erwin Rommel. What begins as a limited support mission turns into a long, grinding campaign that ties down German tanks, troops, and aircraft that Germany will soon need desperately for much larger plans. And that's the strategic trap Britain sets without even intending it as a trap. By refusing to lose, Britain forces Germany to fight in more places than it wants to fight. Now layer this over what's happening back home in Britain. The bombing continues, night after night. Cities hit again and again. London, Coventry, Liverpool, Birmingham, and many more. Fires, rubble, families sleeping in shelters and subway stations. Factories taking damage and then reopening. Dockyards burning and then being used again as soon as crews can clear wreckage. Germany expects a psychological collapse. The old pattern from other bombed cities in Europe suggests civilians eventually break under sustained air attack. Britain doesn't follow that script. Civil defense gets organized, repairs get prioritized, production disperses and adapts. People grieve, then show up to work. The country absorbs punishment and keeps functioning. And as the months pass, something else shifts, this time in America. American journalists reporting from Britain describe a population under pressure that refuses to fold. That steady, stubborn endurance starts to erode the easy isolationist belief that Britain is finished anyway. In March 1941, the United States passes Lend-Lease, material support without direct military entry. Roosevelt frames it as helping democracy defend itself, and it begins feeding Britain the tools it needs to keep going. But let's be clear, even with supplies coming, Britain is still carrying the war itself. It is still fighting in the desert, still holding the Mediterranean against Italy and now Germany, still taking bombs at home, still protecting Atlantic lifelines under constant threat. And by spring 1941, the war at sea delivers another moment where Britain's survival hangs on steel, timing, and luck. Because Germany unleashes a new threat into the North Atlantic, one that isn't a U-boat pack, but a surface monster designed to hunt convoys. May 1941. The battleship Bismarck breaks out into the Atlantic, Germany's newest and most powerful battleship, built to tear into British supply routes and force the Royal Navy into a crisis. And the hunt that follows will become one of the most famous chases of the entire war, because if Bismarck escapes into the open ocean, Britain's lifeline to North America could start bleeding fast. That's where we go next. Now it's May 1941, and the North Atlantic is the kind of place that can swallow fleets. This is where Britain's survival is measured in cargo manifests, fuel, food, raw materials, weapons, everything that keeps the island fighting. If the supply lines get cut, Britain doesn't just get weaker, Britain gets starved out. Germany knows that, so when its newest battleship Bismarck breaks into the Atlantic, it's not just a big ship at sea. It's a strategic threat meant to crack the system holding Britain up. Bismarck is enormous, about 50,000 tons, heavily armored, armed with 15-inch guns, and built to win a straight gunfight against almost anything Britain can put in front of it, one-on-one. If it starts hitting convoys, it forces Britain to pull escorts away, stretch the Royal Navy thin, and gamble ships Britain can't easily replace. Britain responds the only way it can, by throwing everything into a hunt. The Royal Navy commits major units, battleships like King George V and Rodney, cruisers, and the carrier Ark Royal. The goal is simple. Find Bismarck, keep contact, and sink it before it can vanish into the ocean and start wrecking the Atlantic lifeline. Then the nightmare hits. In the Denmark Strait, Bismarck meets the battlecruiser HMS Hood, a symbol of the Royal Navy, famous and feared. The fight is short and violent. Hood is struck, and it blows apart. Over 1,400 men die. For Britain, it feels like being punched in the throat. For Germany, it looks like proof that Bismarck can't be stopped. And for a moment, it seems like Bismarck might escape. For days, British forces chase across a massive stretch of sea. Contact is uncertain. The weather works against them. The Atlantic is big enough to hide a battleship if you lose the trail at the wrong time. But then something almost absurd happens. The same kind of absurd that keeps showing up in this story. A swordfish biplane, slow, outdated, the type of aircraft modern officers love to dismiss, gets the lucky, crucial hit. On the evening of May 26, 1941, aircraft from Ark Royal attack. One torpedo strike jams Bismarck's rudder. The ship loses proper steering and can't maneuver freely. Instead of escaping, it begins circling, trapped by mechanical damage. And the next day, May 27th, British battleships close in. What follows isn't a clean duel, it's a pounding. King George V and Rodney hammer Bismarck at close range. The German ship fights hard. Its crew stays at their stations under fire. The guns keep trying to answer, but the British weight is too much. The superstructure gets shredded. The main batteries are silenced. The hull takes repeated hits. And still, for a while, Bismarck refuses to go down. Eventually, torpedoes finish the job and the ship capsizes. Most of its crew dies in the freezing Atlantic. With Bismarck gone, the German surface fleet dream dies with it. Germany will still threaten the Atlantic with U-boats, but the big battleship breakout becomes far less realistic as a strategy. Britain has just hunted down the most feared modern battleship afloat using a mix of capital ships and carrier aircraft, again proving that obsolete planes used the right way can change outcomes. And all of this is happening while Britain is still, officially, alone in the war. Then June 26, 1941 arrives. Germany invades the Soviet Union. Operation Barbarossa opens the largest land war in history. It's the exact strategic situation Germany once swore it wouldn't repeat. A two-front problem. Germany is now fighting deep into Russia, while Britain remains undefeated in the West, still holding airspace, still fighting at sea, still resisting in the Mediterranean, still forcing Germany to allocate planes and ships and attention that could otherwise be concentrated. This matters because Germany's war machine isn't unlimited. It looks unstoppable, but it runs on fuel, spare parts, training pipelines, and the human limits of crews and pilots. Britain's continued existence means Germany can't simplify the war. It has to keep U-boats in the Atlantic. It has to keep aircraft committed to Britain and the Western approaches. It has to keep pressure in the Mediterranean and North Africa because that theater won't go away on its own. And while Germany expands east, Britain keeps absorbing pressure at home. The Blitz, night bombing, has already been raging through late 1940 and into 1941. City after city takes hits. The tonnage of bombs is massive. Tens of thousands of civilians die. Neighborhoods burn. Docklands and industrial districts get smashed. Families sleep in shelters, basements, tunnels, and stations. The sound of sirens becomes part of daily life. Germany expects morale to snap, but Britain keeps working. And that's one of the most quietly strategic victories of this entire period. The bombing campaign fails to do what Germany needs it to do. It doesn't force political surrender. It doesn't stop production. In some cases, output even increases as Britain adapts, shifts schedules, reorganizes repairs, disperses industries, and hardens civil defense. By May 1941, Germany scales back the Blitz, not because Britain broke, but because Germany needs aircraft for the coming Eastern War. And in America, that reality is getting harder to ignore. American reporting from Britain makes it clear this isn't a doomed nation waiting for rescue. It's a nation refusing to die. That changes public opinion. It changes the political environment, and it creates space for more support, like Lend-Lease, without the United States committing troops yet. Still, through all of this, America is not in the war. Then December 7th, 1941 happens. Pearl Harbor. The United States enters World War II after roughly 19 months of watching Britain fight on without it. And by the time America enters, the situation is radically different than Germany expected in June 1940. Britain is still alive. Britain is still a base. Britain is still a platform from which power can be projected back into Europe. That is the key. American industrial strength ends up being decisive, yes. But industrial power needs access. It needs staging areas, airfields, ports, logistics, and a secure partner on the edge of the continent. Britain provides that because it refused to accept defeat when it stood alone. Look at the chain of effects beat by beat. The Battle of Britain blocks the invasion and keeps British airfields intact, airfields that later become launch points for American bombers and fighters. Taranto cripples Italy's battle fleet and shifts Mediterranean naval reality, making British operations and supply routes more possible. Operation Compass saves Egypt and keeps the Suez Canal from becoming an Axis lever, while also triggering Germany's decision to send forces into North Africa, creating a long campaign that drains German resources. The Atlantic fight keeps Britain connected to supplies and to America's production, despite constant threat. The Blitz fails to break morale and fails to crush British war-making capacity. None of these victories alone ends the war. That's not the point. Together, they do something Germany believed was strategically impossible in 1940. They keep Britain in the war, and keeping Britain in the war changes everything that comes after. When American forces land in North Africa in November 1942 during Operation Torch, they land into a theater where Britain has been fighting for years, keeping ground from being locked down permanently by the Axis. When American air power grows into a major weapon against Germany, it does it from British bases that survived because fighter command held in 1940. When D-Day is planned and executed in 1944, it launches from an island that Germany once expected to be negotiating within weeks of France falling. That is the backbone of the argument behind this entire story. America didn't win WWII alone. America's power needed time and a foothold. Britain bought that time and held that foothold by refusing to lose when the odds were awful. German planners accounted for armies and alliances and rational behavior. They didn't account for an island nation deciding that surrender simply wasn't on the menu. So when people reduce this era to America saved Britain, they're skipping the part where Britain first saved the possibility of America saving anyone at all. If this changed how you see the early war, make sure you're subscribed. More stories like this are coming, and they only hit right when you catch the full context. Britain fought for 19 months while America watched from the sidelines, not passively, not waiting, fighting, adapting, and winning key battles that kept the war from ending before the U.S. ever arrived. Some countries wait for the odds to look good. Others make the odds look better by refusing to quit.